Liam sat at the polished mahogany table, a ghost in his own life. The crystal glasses gleamed under the recessed lighting of his in-laws' dining room, each one a tiny, mocking star. The air, thick with the scent of roasted lamb and expensive perfume, felt heavy in his lungs. Across the table, his wife Chloe laughed. It was a beautiful sound, light and musical. But to Liam, it was the chime of a bell tolling the end of his patience. Her father, Richard, a man whose tailored suits were a second skin and whose smile never quite reached his eyes, had just finished a story about a bumbling junior associate at his investment firm. The punchline, delivered with a dismissive wave of his hand, was, "The boy has ambition, I'll give him that, but he has the financial acumen of a particularly dim-witted golden retriever." The table erupted in polite, predatory laughter. Eleanor, Chloe's mother, dabbed the corner of her perfect mouth with a linen napkin, her diamond bracelet scattering light across the room. "Oh, Richard, you're terrible," she said, though her eyes shone with amusement. Marcus, Chloe's brother, a younger, softer echo of his father, smirked into his wineglass. Then, all eyes turned to Liam. It was a familiar ritual, the finale. "Well, Liam," Richard began, leaning forward, his voice dripping with condescending bonhomie, "as our resident architectural visionary, what's your take? You deal with plans, don't you? Surely you can appreciate a poorly executed one." Liam, an architect who had spent the last 5 years cultivating an image of quiet, unremarkable mediocrity, simply offered a small, placid smile. "Sometimes the simplest plans are the most effective." Chloe laughed again, and this time the sound was sharp, edged with embarrassment. "Oh, darling, don't be so dull. Daddy is talking about the real world, about making money, not drawing pretty pictures of buildings that never get built." The insult landed, as it was designed to. For 3 years since he and Chloe had married, this had been the narrative. Liam, the dreamy, impractical artist, a financial burden tolerated for Chloe's sake. He was the court jester in a kingdom of finance, his quiet nature mistaken for weakness, his modesty for failure. They had no idea that his pretty pictures were blueprints for some of the most innovative and profitable sustainable developments across Asia and Europe. They didn't know that his modest architect's salary was a carefully constructed fiction, a rounding error in the vast, silent empire he commanded. Tonight, the humiliation felt different. It felt final. A line had been crossed in his own heart. He looked at his wife, truly looked at her, and saw not the woman he had fallen in love with, but a stranger who wore her face, a person who derived pleasure from his public diminishment. He took a slow, deliberate sip of water, the quiet before the storm. He knew what he had to do. The game was over. The years of patient observation, of gathering data on their characters, were complete. The verdict was in. He placed his glass down with a soft click that seemed to cut through the lingering laughter. He looked directly at Chloe, his expression unreadable. "That's not entirely fair, Chloe," he said, his voice even and calm. "I do know a little about money. In fact, I've been meaning to tell you all. I'm rich." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a thick, syrupy silence, broken only by a single, sharp bark of laughter from Chloe. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated disbelief. "Oh, Liam," she gasped, wiping a tear of mirth from her eye. "You're hilarious. Rich? What did you do, sell a drawing for $500? Richard and Marcus chuckled, looking at each other with shared amusement. Eleanor simply looked annoyed, as if Liam had committed a grave social faux pas by telling such a pathetic joke. "No," Liam said, his voice retaining its unnerving calm. "Richer than you. Richer than all of you combined." Chloe's laughter died in her throat, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "Stop it, Liam. You're embarrassing me." "I'm not trying to embarrass you," he said. "I'm telling you the truth." He held her gaze. "And in about 90 seconds, you're going to understand that." He felt the familiar weight of his phone in his pocket. He didn't need to look at it. He had sent the text, a single, prearranged word, execute, 3 minutes ago, just as Richard was landing his punchline. The family thought this was a desperate, pathetic plea for attention. They couldn't know that it was, in fact, a declaration of war, that this opulent room, their fortress of wealth and status, was about to become the site of their unconditional surrender. They believed they were in control. They didn't know that for the past 3 years they hadn't been in control of anything at all. It's a funny thing, isn't it? How we can look at someone every single day and see only what we want to see. I know many of you watching have probably felt underestimated at some point in your lives. Maybe at work, maybe in your own family. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and if you've ever had to prove someone wrong. It's a feeling we can all understand. The story you're about to hear is about what happens when patience runs out and the truth, in all its terrible and wonderful glory, finally comes to light. So, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and settle in, because the punchline to Liam's joke was about to walk right through the door. The 90 seconds Liam had allotted stretched into an eternity. Richard had recovered his composure and was now looking at Liam with a kind of clinical pity. "Son," he began, adopting the tone of a disappointed headmaster, "I know things must be difficult for you. Your pride is understandable. But making up these fantasies is not the answer. Perhaps you and I could have a chat sometime this week. I might be able to find a junior project management role for you at the firm. It would give you a sense of purpose." The offer hung in the air, a masterpiece of condescension. It was a perfect encapsulation of their entire relationship. Richard, the benevolent king, offering a crust of bread to the court beggar. Marcus snickered, barely hiding it behind his hand. He was enjoying the spectacle immensely. Liam felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a play he had written long ago. He had anticipated this exact reaction, this precise flavor of dismissive arrogance. It was all part of the pattern. "Thank you for the offer, Richard," Liam said, his voice still level. "But I don't think that will be necessary." Chloe, however, was no longer amused. Her face was a mask of fury. "How dare you," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "How dare you sit here and make a mockery of my family after everything they've done for you? For us. They welcome you into their home. They feed you. My father offers you a job, a real job, and you repay them with these childish, insane lies?" "Is it a lie, Chloe?" Liam asked softly. "Or is it a truth you simply don't want to hear?" "There's nothing to hear," she shot back. "I see our bank account, Liam. I see the bills I have to juggle because your firm pays you a pittance. I see the car you drive, the clothes you wear. I live in that tiny, awful apartment with you. Don't you dare talk to me about money." Each word was a hammer blow, intended to pulverize his dignity. He let them land. He had built an anvil in his soul over the past 3 years, and her hammers simply bounced off. He had wanted to see how far she would go. Now he knew. There was no floor. He glanced subtly at the ornate grandfather clock in the corner of the room. The 90 seconds were up. As if on cue, the doorbell chimed. Not the melodic, gentle chime for guests, but a sharp, insistent buzz. Once. Twice. A nervous-looking housekeeper scurried from the kitchen. "Sir, there are some men at the door. They say they have an appointment with Mr. Walsh." Liam's surname, not Richard's. Richard frowned. "An appointment? Here? With Liam? Don't be ridiculous. Tell them they have the wrong address." "They were very specific, sir," the housekeeper stammered, wringing her hands. "They said Mr. Liam Walsh is expecting them." Before Richard could issue another command, the front door opened. The sound was not forced. It was the quiet, confident sound of a key turning in a lock. And then they walked in. There were not, as Liam had imagined for dramatic effect, 8 of them. There were 4. But the effect was more, not less, profound. They were not brutish thugs. They were men who moved with the silent, economic grace of immense power. They wore dark, impeccably tailored suits that whispered of Savile Row, not a security company. Their faces were calm, their eyes intelligent and watchful. They radiated an aura of quiet competence that made Richard's boisterous authority seem childish and hollow. Leading them was a man in his late 60s, with silver hair and a face etched with the kind of wisdom that only comes from navigating decades of high-stakes global finance. This was Mr. Chen, the legendary head of the Phoenix Strategic Group, a man so discreetly powerful that his name was only ever spoken in hushed, reverent tones in the highest echelons of the world's financial capitals. To see him here, in a suburban dining room, was like seeing a mountain appear in a garden pond. Mr. Chen's eyes scanned the room, taking in the scene with a practiced, instantaneous assessment. They bypassed Richard, Eleanor, and Marcus as if they were furniture. His gaze landed on Liam, and for the first time that evening, a flicker of genuine warmth entered the room. He gave a slight, formal bow. "Mr. Walsh," he said, his voice a low, respectful baritone. "I trust we are not late." Liam finally allowed himself a small, genuine smile. He rose from his chair. The ghost was gone. In his place stood a man they had never seen before. "You're right on time, Chen," he said. "Thank you for coming." Chloe stared, her mouth slightly agape. The laugh was gone. The anger was gone. Her face was a canvas of pure, uncomprehending shock. She looked from Liam's calm, authoritative face to the deferential posture of the legendary Mr. Chen. The two images refused to reconcile in her mind. It was impossible. It was like watching a stray cat command a lion. Richard, for his part, was sputtering. "Chen, Mr. Chen, what is the meaning of this? What are you doing in my house?" Mr. Chen turned his gaze to Richard. There was no recognition in his eyes, no acknowledgement of Richard's status. He looked at him the way one might look at a mildly interesting insect. "Your house?" Mr. Chen said, a single eyebrow arching slightly. "I believe you are mistaken. According to the documents I have here," he gestured to one of his aides, who produced a slim leather portfolio. "This property, along with the other 4 homes you own, and the entirety of the commercial real estate portfolio held by your family trust, was acquired by a subsidiary of the Phoenix Strategic Group 6 months ago." He paused, letting the words settle into the stunned silence. "At the explicit direction," he added, turning his gaze back to Liam, "of its sole principal and owner, Mr. Liam Walsh." The silence that followed was no longer thick and syrupy. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air, all the certainty, all the arrogance out of the room. Chloe went pale, a slow draining of color that left her looking like a porcelain doll. She sank back into her chair, her eyes wide and vacant. She didn't just go silent, she looked as if the very concept of sound had been erased from her universe. The man she had mocked, the man she had called a failure, the man she had just finished eviscerating for his lack of ambition, owned the very floor beneath her feet. And that, she was beginning to understand with a dawning, gut-wrenching horror, was only the beginning. The revelation hung in the air, a physical entity. The transfer of power was so swift, so absolute, it was almost violent. One moment, Richard was the king in his castle, magnanimously offering Liam a menial job. The next, he was a tenant, a guest in a house that no longer belonged to him, being addressed by a man who wouldn't have given him the time of day a moment before. Richard's face cycled through a series of emotions: confusion, indignation, and finally, a creeping, sickening dread. "Acquired? That's impossible. My assets are secured. There would have been paperwork, notifications. I would know if my properties were sold." Mr. Chen's expression remained impassive, but there was a glint of something akin to pity in his eyes. It was the pity of a grandmaster for a novice who has just realized he was checkmated 10 moves ago. Your family trust, Mr. Davenport, was heavily leveraged against a series of high-risk derivatives, managed by a hedge fund called Sterling Cross. I'm sure you're familiar with them. You praised their aggressive strategies at a gala last year. Mr. Walsh was kind enough to send me the clip. Richard's blood ran cold. Sterling Cross was his golden goose, the source of the explosive returns that funded his lavish lifestyle. When Sterling Cross faced a catastrophic margin call 3 quarters ago, Mr. Chen continued, his voice a flat, factual monotone. Its creditors moved to liquidate its asset portfolio. My firm, acting on behalf of Mr. Walsh, acquired their entire debt ledger at a significant discount. This gave us controlling interest in their holdings, which included the collateral posted by their largest clients. Your family trust was, by a considerable margin, their largest client. He paused. You have been, for all intents and purposes, insolvent for the last 8 months. Mr. Walsh's generosity is the only reason you have not yet been served with eviction notices. Generosity. The word was a slap in the face. The charity Richard thought he had been showing Liam was a pale imitation of the silent, immense charity Liam had been extending to him and his entire family. He had been dancing on the edge of a cliff, blissfully unaware that the only thing keeping him from falling was the hand of the man he was kicking. Eleanor let out a small, choked gasp. She looked at her husband, her eyes wide with accusation and fear. The diamonds on her wrists suddenly looked like cheap glass. Her entire world, a world built on the bedrock of Richard's financial genius, had just been revealed as a stage set, and the stage itself was owned by her son-in-law. Marcus was frozen, his earlier smirk wiped clean from his face. He looked from his father's ashen expression to Liam's calm demeanor. The hierarchy of his world had been inverted. The alpha male of his pack had been neutered, and the omega he had tormented was now the undisputed leader. But all of Liam's focus was on Chloe. She was the epicenter of this earthquake. He watched her as the aftershocks rolled through her. Her breath was shallow, her hands clenched in her lap. The woman who had, minutes ago, lectured him on the realities of money was now confronting a reality she could not have conceived of in her wildest nightmares. Liam walked slowly around the table until he stood behind her chair. He placed his hands gently on her shoulders. She flinched at his touch, as if it were a brand. You see, Chloe, he said, his voice low and intimate, a stark contrast to the public pronouncements of Mr. Chen. You were right. I was living a lie, but not the one you thought. He looked around the room, meeting the terrified eyes of her family. This was not just about revealing his wealth. This was about holding up the moral mirror. For 3 years, he began, his voice taking on a new weight, the weight of a judge delivering a long-considered sentence. I have sat at this table and listened. I have cataloged every slight, every condescending remark, every casual cruelty. I wanted to understand. I truly did. I wanted to believe that somewhere, beneath the obsession with status and the worship of money, the people I had joined my life with were still there. He looked at Richard. You called me a charity case. That was at your anniversary party, 2 years ago, when you thought I was out of earshot. The irony is that the caterer you were so proud of, the one you said was impossibly exclusive, is owned by a hospitality group my fund took public 3 years ago. Your party was, in effect, a gift from me. He turned his gaze to Eleanor. You once lamented to Chloe that my lack of breeding was a stain on the family. You said it over brunch at the Grandview Hotel. My foundation has been the primary benefactor of the cultural trust that saved the Grandview from demolition. I preserved it. You merely rented a table there. His eyes found Marcus. And you've taken great pleasure in joking about my car, my clothes, my career. Last Christmas you gave me a book, Finance for Dummies. You thought it was hilarious. The author of that book is a professor whose endowed chair at the university was funded by an anonymous donation I made in my mother's name. Each statement was a perfectly placed stone, dropped into the silent pond of their shock. the ripples spreading outwards, reordering the entire landscape of their shared history. He wasn't just telling them he was rich, he was systematically dismantling the very foundation of their superiority, showing them that the world they thought they commanded was, in fact, a world he had built and owned around them. Finally, he came back to Chloe. He leaned down, his voice a near whisper in her ear. "And you, my love, you were the worst of all, because you knew me, you knew my heart, and you chose them, you chose this." His hand swept out to indicate the room, the house, the lifestyle. "You laughed at my dreams, and then you laughed at my fabricated failure. Tonight you laughed when I told you the truth. You said I was embarrassing you." He straightened up, his voice clear and resonant again, filling the cavernous silence. "The embarrassment is over, Chloe. The truth is here. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" Mr. Chen, ever the professional, stepped forward. "Mr. Walsh, your instructions regarding the Davenport assets?" Liam didn't look at him. He kept his eyes fixed on his wife's pale, stricken face. "Liquidate them," he said, the words simple, devastating, and final. "All of them. The houses, the cars, the art, the club memberships. Freeze the trust. The funds are to be redirected into the Foundation's low-income housing initiative. Let's build something real with it." Richard made a strangled noise, half protest, half sob. "Liam, son, you can't. This will ruin us." Liam finally turned to look at his father-in-law. There was no anger in his eyes, only a profound, weary sadness. "You were already ruined, Richard. You just didn't know it. You built a house of cards on a foundation of debt and arrogance. I'm just letting the wind blow." He then looked back at Chloe. Her silence was no longer born of shock. It was the silence of utter devastation. She was looking at him as if for the first time, and seeing a man who was not only a stranger, but a terrifyingly powerful one. The humble, gentle man she had married, the man she had so casually disdained, had been a phantom. This cool, decisive, formidable person was a reality, and he had just dismantled her entire world with a few quiet words. The laughter was a distant, mocking echo from a life that no longer existed. Chloe's first instinct was survival. Her entire life had been a masterclass in social navigation, in aligning herself with power. The source of that power had just undergone a seismic shift, but the instinct remained the same. She looked up at Liam, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. The shock was receding, replaced by a frantic, desperate calculation. "Liam," she whispered, her voice trembling. She reached out, her hand hovering over his arm, before she seemed to lose the nerve to touch him. I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me? This could have been our life." The "we" was a carefully chosen pronoun, a bridge, an attempt to reposition herself on the winning side. Liam saw it for exactly what it was. It was not an apology for her cruelty, but a lament for her ignorance. She wasn't sorry for how she treated him. She was sorry she had backed the wrong horse. "Tell you?" he responded, his voice still quiet but now honed to a razor's edge. "Why would I have told you, Chloe? I wanted a partner, not a parasite. I wanted a wife who loved me, Liam the architect, for who I was, for my character, my heart, my mind, not for my balance sheet." He took a step back, breaking the last vestige of their physical connection. "I ran a 3-year experiment. I gave you a version of me that had nothing to offer but myself. I wanted to see if that was enough. Tonight, I got my answer." Eleanor, seeing her daughter's gambit fail, tried a different tack. The matriarch, the social puppeteer, attempted to pull the strings of family and decorum. "Liam, this is a private matter," she said, her voice strained but attempting to regain some semblance of authority. "There is no need for these gentlemen to be here. We are family. We can discuss this. I'm sure we've all said things we regret in the heat of the moment." "Regret?" Liam's gaze fell upon her, cold and analytical. Do you regret the things you said, Eleanor? Or do you regret that I heard them? Do you regret belittling me? Or do you regret that the man you belittled now holds your entire world in the palm of his hand? The moral mirror was back, and it was blinding. There was no answer she could give that wouldn't condemn her. Richard, meanwhile, had collapsed into his chair, a broken man. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by the hollow-eyed look of utter defeat. He wasn't thinking about family or decorum. He was a financier to his core, and he was running the numbers. He was calculating the scale of his ruin. It was total, absolute. My company, he mumbled mostly to himself. Davenport Capital. It's my life's work, my legacy. Mr. Chen, who had been standing by with the serene patience of a predator that knows its prey is cornered, answered the unspoken question. Davenport Capital's primary creditor was, until last Tuesday, the North Atlantic Bank. As you know, their commercial debt division was acquired. It was acquired by us. Your firm is now a wholly owned subsidiary of the Phoenix Strategic Group. He glanced at Liam. Mr. Walsh has not yet issued instructions regarding its future. The last desperate ember of hope in Richard's eyes flickered. A subsidiary, not dissolved. Not yet. Liam, he pleaded, his voice raspy. He was looking at his son-in-law now, not with condescension or pity, but with the raw, naked desperation of a drowning man. Please, anything. I'll do anything. The firm, it's all I have. Liam let the plea hang in the air. He wanted them to feel the full weight of the reversal. The man they offered a junior role to now controlled their legacy. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been pulverized and remade. He walked over to the large bay window that overlooked the manicured gardens. For a moment he was silent, looking out into the darkness. The garden was illuminated by carefully placed spotlights, another ostentatious display of wealth, his wealth. You know, he said, his back still to the room, the first time I came to this house for dinner, I was so nervous. I was in love with your daughter, and I wanted so desperately for you to like me. I brought a bottle of wine, a $20 Cabernet. I had researched it. It had won some minor awards. I thought it was a thoughtful gesture. He turned around. Richard, you looked at the label and said, "How quaint," and you handed it to the housekeeper to use for cooking. Then you opened a bottle from your cellar that you proudly announced was worth more than my suit. He paused. I never forgot that. The casual, thoughtless cruelty of it. It wasn't about the wine. It was about establishing my place. It was about making sure I knew I was beneath you. He looked at Richard's ruined face. Your legacy, Richard, your life's work? You built it on a foundation of making other people feel small. You think your firm is just numbers on a screen? It's people. People like that young associate you mocked tonight. People you step on to make yourself feel taller. He walked back to the center of the room. So, no, Richard, I will not save your company. Mr. Chen, he said, his voice now crisp and decisive. Dissolve Davenport Capital. Sell off its viable assets. The employees, from the partners down to the janitorial staff, are to be given generous severance packages and placement assistance through our Human Resources Division. As for the senior partners who fostered Richard's toxic culture, they can look for new opportunities. The building itself will be donated to the city to be used as a startup incubator for minority-owned businesses. It was poetic justice, delivered with surgical precision. He wasn't just destroying Richard's company, he was transforming it into everything Richard despised. He was taking a monument to elitism and turning it into a beacon of opportunity. Richard made a sound like he had been punched in the gut. Eleanor let out a faint sob. Marcus stared at the floor, his face pale. And Chloe finally spoke again. The calculation was gone. The desperation was gone. In their place was something new, a sliver of understanding. You planned this, she said, her voice flat. This wasn't a sudden decision. You've been planning this for years. Liam met her gaze. I didn't plan to destroy your family, Chloe. I planned to build a life with you. I hid my wealth because I wanted to be sure. I gave you every chance to choose me. You never did. He reached into the pocket of his simple, off-the-rack jacket. He pulled out a small, worn object and placed it on the table. It was a key, a simple, unassuming house key. "This was for us," he said softly. "It's the key to a house I designed and built myself. It's on a cliff overlooking the ocean. It's not opulent, it's just beautiful. It has a studio for me and a sunroom for you because you always said you wanted a place to read. I thought we would move in after our 5th anniversary." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a sorrow that was deeper than anger. "But a house is not a home. A home is built with love and respect, and we don't have that. We have this." He gestured to the room, to the wreckage of her family. A beautiful, expensive illusion. He pushed the key across the table toward her. "Your father is ruined. Your mother's social standing is gone. Your brother will have to find his own way for the first time in his life. Everything you valued is gone. So I'm going to give you a choice. Not about my money, that's off the table. This is a choice about you." He stood tall, the quiet architect finally revealed as the master builder of all their fates. "You can stay here, in the rubble of the life you thought you wanted. Or you can start over. Find out who Chloe Davenport is without the money and the status. Find a person worth respecting. The choice is yours." With that, he turned to Mr. Chen. "We're done here." He walked out of the dining room without a backward glance. Mr. Chen and his silent associates followed, their footsteps the only sound in the ruined cathedral of Richard Davenport's pride. Chloe was left staring at the simple key on the polished table, a symbol of a life she could have had, a life she had traded for the glittering emptiness that now lay in ashes all around her. The silence in the room was no longer a vacuum. It was a tomb. The days that followed were a study in implosion. The Davenport world did not just crack, it disintegrated. The news of Davenport Capital's dissolution sent a shockwave through their social circle. At first, it was dismissed as a hostile takeover, a tragedy for poor Richard. But the truth, as it always does, began to seep out in whispers and rumors. The story was too strange, too dramatic to stay hidden. The architect's son-in-law, the secret billionaire, the public humiliation. Liam, through Mr. Chen, was ruthlessly efficient. The family homes were put on the market, their contents cataloged for auction. The luxury cars were repossessed. The club memberships were revoked. The credit cards were declined. The machinery of wealth that had insulated the Davenports from the mundane realities of life was systematically dismantled, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. Richard, stripped of his company and his pride, became a ghost. He would sit for hours in the one room of the house they were allowed to occupy until the sale was finalized, staring at a blank television screen. He had lost his identity. He was no longer Richard Davenport, the titan of finance. He was just a man in a room. Eleanor's fall was perhaps the most brutal. Her currency was social capital, and her account was now overdrawn. Her friends, the ones she had lunched with and vacationed with, suddenly became unavailable. Her calls went unanswered. Invitations dried up. To be associated with the Davenports was now a liability. She had spent a lifetime climbing a social ladder, only to find herself kicked off the top, landing in a place she never knew existed: irrelevance. Marcus, forced to fend for himself, was utterly lost. His resume was a thin collection of nepotistic titles at his father's firm. He had no real skills, no genuine experience. He tried to leverage his family name, but the name was now poison. He was forced to take a low-level sales job, a humbling, galling experience that stripped him of the last vestiges of his inherited arrogance. For the first time, he had to earn his place in the world, and he found it far harder than he had ever imagined. And Chloe? Chloe was in a special kind of hell. She was the nexus of it all, the one person with a direct line to the man who held all the cards. Her family, in their desperation, turned on her. "You have to fix this," her mother would plead, her voice thin and reedy. "You're his wife. Go to him. Beg. Cry. Do whatever you have to do." "This is your fault," her father would mumble, his eyes vacant. "You brought him into this family. You should have seen. You should have known." They saw her not as a daughter, but as a tool, a key to unlock the gilded cage they had been thrown out of. But Chloe knew it was not that simple. She understood now that Liam was not a man who could be manipulated by tears or seduction. The choice he had given her was real. It was not a test she could cheat on. She left the house. She took nothing but a small suitcase of clothes and the last few $100s in her personal account. She rented a small, furnished room in a part of the city she had only ever driven through with the windows up. The room was stark, with a single bed, a small desk, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. The silence of that room was different from the silence in the dining room. It was not the silence of shock or devastation. It was the silence of emptiness, the silence of a life scrubbed clean. For the first week, she did nothing but lie on the bed and stare at the ceiling. She was detoxing from a lifetime of privilege. The constant hum of activity, of social obligations, of spending, was gone. She was left with nothing but herself, and she found she was a stranger. Who was she without her father's money, her mother's social standing, her own curated beauty? The question terrified her. She got a job, a simple, humbling job as a waitress in a small cafe. The work was hard, the hours long, the pay minimal. Her hands, once soft and manicured, became calloused. Her feet ached at the end of every shift. She learned to smile at rude customers, to swallow her pride, to say thank you for a $2 tip. And a strange thing happened. In the crucible of this new, hard life, the layers of her old self began to burn away. The arrogance, the entitlement, the casual cruelty, they had no place here. They were excess baggage she could no longer afford to carry. She started to see the world not as a stage for her performance, but as a collection of people, each with their own struggles. She learned empathy, not as a concept, but as a daily practice. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, she was walking home in the rain. She didn't have the money for a cab, so she just walked, the cold water soaking through her thin jacket. She wasn't crying, she was just feeling. For the first time in a long time, she was feeling something real. Not the manufactured drama of her old life, but the simple, profound reality of being tired and wet and alone. And in that moment, she thought of the key to the house on the cliff. She hadn't taken it, she had left it on the table, a symbol of a life she didn't deserve. She thought of the man who had built that house, the quiet, gentle man she had married and then systematically broken. She thought of his patience, his quiet observation, his profound, devastating disappointment in her. She finally understood. Liam hadn't destroyed her family out of revenge. He had done it as an act of terrible, painful creation. He had burned their world down so that something new, something real, could potentially grow from the ashes. He had given them the one thing they never had, a chance to become better people, a chance to earn their own self-respect. She stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, the rain plastering her hair to her face. And for the first time since that night, she thought about Liam not as a source of power or a symbol of her failure, but as her husband, the man she had promised to love and honor, a promise she had broken in 1,000 different ways. The anger she had felt, the shame, the fear, it all coalesced into a single, clarifying emotion: remorse. Deep, profound, soul-shattering remorse. She knew what she had to do. It wasn't about getting the money back. It wasn't about winning him over. It was about taking the final step in the choice he had given her. It was about facing him, not as Chloe Davenport, the fallen princess, but as Chloe Walsh, the woman who had failed her husband and was finally, truly, sorry. She had to find him, not to ask for anything, but to give him the one thing she had withheld for so long, an honest apology. Finding Liam was not difficult. Finding the courage to face him was. Chloe learned through a discreet inquiry made by a former acquaintance, one of the few who still spoke to her, mostly out of pity, that Liam had taken up residence in a downtown penthouse. The address was a monument to modern architecture, a sleek glass tower that pierced the clouds. It was a building he had designed. She stood across the street from it for a full hour, the contrast between the gleaming tower and her own drab existence, a chasm. Her waitress uniform was in her bag. She had changed into the nicest, simplest dress she owned, a relic from her old life that now felt like a costume. Finally, she took a deep breath and walked into the lobby. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of white tea. A concierge, a man with a polite but impenetrable expression, stood behind a marble desk. "May I help you?" he asked, his eyes giving her a swift, professional appraisal. He saw the cheap shoes, the worn coat. "I'm here to see Liam Walsh," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "My name is Chloe Walsh. I don't have an appointment." The concierge's expression didn't change, but a flicker of recognition entered his eyes. He knew the name. He discreetly typed something into his computer, then spoke softly into a phone. After a moment, he looked up at her. "Mr. Walsh will see you. Penthouse suite. The elevator on the right is for private access." The ride up was silent and swift. The elevator opened directly into a vast, open-plan living space. The walls were almost entirely glass, offering a breathtaking 180-degree view of the city. The furniture was minimalist, elegant, and comfortable. There were no ostentatious displays of wealth, only books, art, and space. It was a room that valued thought and perspective over perspective. It was a room that was entirely Liam. He was standing by the window, looking out at the city. He turned as she entered. He was dressed simply, in jeans and a soft gray sweater. He looked calm, peaceful. The weary sadness she had seen in his eyes that night was gone, replaced by a quiet clarity. "Chloe," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a simple statement of fact. "Liam," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. She stood awkwardly by the elevator, feeling like an intruder. "You look different," he said, his gaze analytical but not unkind. "I have a job," she said, the words tumbling out. "I'm a waitress. It's hard. I'm tired all the time." She didn't know why she was telling him this. It felt important somehow, a credential. He nodded slowly. "I know." Of course he knew. He knew everything. He had probably been tracking her every move, not out of malice, but out of a meticulous, cautious curiosity. Silence fell between them. It was her move. This was why she had come. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she began, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. "I don't want money. I don't want my old life back. I know I don't deserve it." She took a breath and forced herself to meet his eyes. "I came to apologize. Not because you're rich and I was wrong about that, but because you were my husband and I was cruel to you. I was a terrible wife. I was a terrible person." Tears started to well in her eyes, but she fought them back. "This wasn't about eliciting pity. I took your gentleness for weakness. I took your patience for a lack of ambition. I joined in with my family when they mocked you because I was a coward. I was so afraid of not being one of them, of losing my place, that I sacrificed you. I sacrificed us." She looked around the beautiful, empty room. "This life, you built it all on your own. You earned it. And all I ever did was try to tear you down because you weren't living the life my father bought for me. I'm so sorry, Liam, for everything. For the laughter, for the insults, for my silence when I should have defended you. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry." She had said it. The words were out, hanging in the air between them. She felt a strange lightness, the release of a burden she had been carrying since that night. She had done what she came to do. She had no expectations. She turned to leave. "That's all. I needed you to hear it." "Chloe, wait," he said. She stopped, her back to him. "Look in the portfolio on the coffee table," he said. She hesitated, then walked over to the low, marble table. Lying there was a familiar object, his old, worn leather portfolio, the one he used to carry, the one she had once called his collection of failed dreams. It was the symbolic object, the representation of his hidden power. She opened it. Inside there were no deeds, no stock certificates. There were architectural drawings, sketches, renderings, and they were all of a single house, the house on the cliff. There were dozens of them, iterations and refinements made over years. She saw notes in the margins in his familiar, neat handwriting. Wider windows in the sunroom for Chloe. Bookshelves here, enough for her collection. A path down to the beach. Beneath the drawings was a single legal document. It was a deed, the deed to the house. And the name on it was not his. It was hers. Chloe Walsh. The transfer had been dated 6 months ago, long before that final, terrible dinner. She looked up at him, her vision blurring with tears. "But why?" He walked over to her, his expression soft. "Because I never stopped loving the woman I married. I just couldn't live with the person she had become. I held on to the hope that she was still in there, somewhere." He gestured to the drawings. "That was my dream, Chloe. Not the money, not the empire. That. A life with you, in a home we built together. When I realized you had chosen your family's values over ours, I had to make a choice. I could walk away, or I could try to save you. I couldn't save your family. They were too far gone. But you, I thought there was still a chance." He reached out and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. "Destroying their world wasn't a punishment. It was a rescue mission. I had to strip away everything you were hiding behind so you could find out who you really were. I had to see if you would make the right choice when you had nothing left to lose." She looked at the deed in her trembling hands, and then at his face. "You did all of this for me." "I did it for us," he corrected gently. "I took the biggest gamble of my life. I bet everything on the hope that the woman I fell in love with was stronger than the world she grew up in." He took her hands in his. "The last few months, you got a job. You supported yourself. You faced reality. You came here today with no agenda other than to apologize. You didn't have to do any of that. You could have stayed with your mother, blaming me. You could have tried to use our marriage to sue me. You didn't. You chose the hard path. You chose integrity." He looked into her eyes and she saw it. The love she thought she had destroyed, still there, patient and waiting. "The house is yours, Chloe, no matter what happens. It was always meant for you, a place to be yourself." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "The question now is the same one I asked you that night, but it means something different now. What are you going to do with it?" Chloe looked from the deed to his face, the immensity of his faith in her washing over her in a tidal wave of emotion. He hadn't just exposed her flaws, he had orchestrated a painful, elaborate, and deeply loving intervention to help her overcome them. He had burned down her gilded cage not to punish her, but to set her free. The choice was no longer about ruin or a new start. It was about redemption. "I want to go home," she whispered, the tears flowing freely now. "But I don't want to go alone." A slow smile spread across Liam's face, a genuine, unguarded smile that she hadn't seen in years. It was the smile of the man she had first fallen in love with, the quiet architect with dreams in his eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said. He pulled her into his arms, and she buried her face in his shoulder, sobbing with relief and a sense of homecoming that was more profound than entering any building. He held her tightly, his hand stroking her hair. The penthouse, the city, The empire outside, it all faded away. In that moment, they were just two people in a room, having found their way back to each other through a wasteland of pride and pain. A week later, they stood on a wind-swept cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The house was exactly as it had been in the drawings, but more beautiful than she could have imagined. It was not a palace, it was a sanctuary, built of warm wood and cool stone, with vast windows that drank in the light and the sea. It felt like a part of the landscape itself. It was a structure of honesty and strength. It was a reflection of Liam. They walked through the rooms hand in hand. He showed her the studio, with its drafting tables and sketches for new, even more ambitious projects. And he showed her the sunroom, its shelves already filled with her favorite books, which he had quietly bought and stored, waiting for this day. That evening they sat on the deck, wrapped in blankets, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. "My father called me," Chloe said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. Liam looked at her, his expression neutral. "Oh? He's in a small apartment now. My mother is with him. He apologized. He said he was proud of me. For the first time in my life, I think he meant it." "And Marcus?" "He's still at the sales job. He hates it, but he's doing it. He called to ask for advice on his resume, not for a handout, for advice." Liam nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Sometimes hitting rock bottom is the only way to find a solid foundation to build on." "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" she asked, a sense of awe in her voice. "You saw all the moves on the chessboard." He smiled and took her hand. "I'm an architect, Chloe. I design systems, structures. I saw a family structure that was fundamentally unsound, built on arrogance and ego. It was bound to collapse. All I did was remove the temporary supports that were holding it up." He grew more serious. "I didn't do it to be cruel. I did it because I believe in redemption. Not the easy kind, but the kind you have to fight for. The kind you have to earn. Your family, they have a long road ahead, but for the first time, they're on the right road. The one that leads to character, not just status." Chloe leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling a sense of peace she had never known. Her old life, with its glittering parties and hollow praise, felt like a distant, half-forgotten dream. This was real. The cool sea breeze, the warmth of the blanket, the solid presence of the man beside her. "And us?" she asked. "Are we on the right road?" Liam turned and kissed her, a kiss that was full of forgiveness, of shared history, and of a future just beginning. "We're home, Chloe," he said. "We're finally home." True worth is not measured in dollars or square footage, but in character and integrity. It's not about the life you are given, but the one you choose to build. Liam, for all his hidden wealth, understood this better than anyone. He knew that the most valuable thing he owned was not his empire, but his principles. And by holding on to them, even in the face of ridicule and disrespect, he not only saved himself, but he offered a path to redemption for the woman he loved. Their story is a powerful reminder that respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned. And sometimes the greatest act of love is not to enable someone's flaws, but to create the conditions that force them to confront them, to burn away the false self and discover the true one waiting underneath. It's a painful process, a trial by fire, but on the other side lies the potential for a bond that is stronger, truer, and more resilient than any fortune. What do you think? Was Liam justified in what he did? Could there have been another way? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Your perspective is what makes this community so special. Thank you for joining us on this journey today. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that make you think and feel. Until next time, remember to build your life on a foundation that cannot be shaken.